In 408 AD, the Visigoths held the city of Rome hostage. Their ransom demand included 3,000 pounds of pepper, not gold, not silver, not slaves, pepper. The Roman Senate paid it without hesitation, because in the ancient world, pepper was worth exactly that much. A pound of black pepper cost the equivalent of several weeks' wages for a laborer. It was used as currency, as rent payment, as diplomatic tribute, as dowry. Alaric the Visigoth understood exactly what he was asking for. The hunger for pepper, specifically black pepper, grown only on the Malabar coast of what is now southwestern India, drove more of human history than most people understand. It sent Portuguese warships around the coast of Africa. It sent Christopher Columbus across the Atlantic. It funded the first multinational corporations. It sparked genocides. And it created the global trade networks that the modern economy is built on. One berry from one vine that grew on one coast of one subcontinent. What if pepper had never existed? What if the spice that launched the age of exploration had stayed unknown? The most valuable berry in the world. Black pepper is the dried fruit of a flowering vine called Piper nigrum, native to the Western Ghats mountain range along the southwestern coast of India. It has been cultivated there for at least 4,000 years. Ancient Sanskrit texts mention it. Egyptian mummies have been found with peppercorns stuffed in their nostrils, placed there during the mummification process as part of the ritual preparation for the afterlife. The peppercorns found in the nostrils of Ramesses II date to approximately 1213 BC. This tells you something about how pepper was valued. It was worth burying with pharaohs. In ancient Rome, pepper was the defining luxury spice. The Romans called it piper and consumed it in extraordinary quantities, not just as a flavoring, but as a medicine, a preservative, and a symbol of status. The cookbook attributed to the Roman gourmet Apicius uses pepper in the majority of its 470 recipes. Roman physicians prescribed it for everything from digestive complaints to fever to snake bites. But pepper was not just a luxury. In medieval Europe, it served two functions that made it genuinely indispensable. First, it was medicine. Medieval physicians prescribed pepper for plague, fever, digestive disorders, and dozens of other conditions. Prescriptions that were wrong by modern standards, but were followed with complete faith across the continent for centuries. Second, and more practically, it was a preservative and flavoring agent that could make rancid or otherwise unpalatable meat edible. In an era without refrigeration, when meat spoiled quickly and the line between acceptable and inedible was thin, pepper was not a luxury addition. It was the difference between eating and not eating. The demand was not driven by gourmets in wealthy households. It was driven by the basic necessity of making food last and taste of something other than rot. All of this pepper came from India, and it passed through many hands before reaching Rome and later medieval Europe. Arab traders, Persian merchants, Egyptian middlemen, each taking their cut. The Arab traders who controlled the overland spice routes understood exactly what they had. and they protected it with something more powerful than armies: stories. For centuries, Arab merchants told European buyers that pepper grew in distant lands guarded by giant, venomous snakes, that the harvesters had to drive the serpents away with fire before they could collect the spice, which explained, conveniently, why the peppercorns were black, that the route to the source passed through valleys of eternal flame and mountains inhabited by monsters. The stories were pure invention, designed to terrify potential competitors and justify the enormous markups that made the spice trade so profitable. Europeans believed them for centuries. When Portuguese sailors finally reached India by sea and found ordinary farmers growing pepper on ordinary hillsides, the disillusionment was profound. The monsters had been a marketing strategy. In medieval England, pepper was so valuable that it was used as literal currency. Landlords accepted it as rent. The term peppercorn rent, which still exists in British law today, referring to a nominal token payment, comes directly from this era, when a single peppercorn was considered a legitimate unit of value. That the phrase now means something trivially small tells you everything about how completely the economics of pepper have inverted over 500 years. The spice that launched 1,000 ships. By the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire controlled the overland routes between Europe and Asia. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 made an already expensive spice trade even more costly. The solution seemed obvious: find a sea route to India that bypassed the intermediaries entirely. This logic drove the great age of European exploration, and it was driven primarily by Portugal. In 1488, Bartholomew Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope. In 1498, Vasco da Gama reached Calicut on the Malabar coast, the first European to sail directly to India. His cargo on the return voyage, pepper, cinnamon, and other spices, was worth 60 times the cost of the entire expedition. 60 times. The Portuguese didn't come to trade as equals. They came to control. Da Gama's second voyage in 1502 was a military operation. A Portuguese fleet intercepted a large pilgrim ship called the Miri, locked its 400 passengers below deck, and burned it to the waterline. Every person aboard died. Da Gama watched it burn. This was not an aberration. It was policy. The Estado da India, the Portuguese seaborne empire, was built on the systematic use of violence to control trade routes. Then came Magellan. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan set out from Spain with 5 ships and 270 men, aiming to sail west around the world to reach the Spice Islands of Asia. His specific target was the Maluku Islands, the Spice Islands, source of cloves, nutmeg, and pepper. Magellan himself died in the Philippines in 1521, killed in a battle he had no strategic reason to fight. Of his original 5 ships, 4 were lost. Of his 270 men, 18 returned. The one surviving ship, the Victoria, limped back to Spain in September 1522, the first vessel to circumnavigate the globe. Its cargo of cloves and pepper was so valuable that it paid for the entire expedition, covered the losses of the 4 ships, and still turned a profit. 1 ship, 18 survivors, the entire cost of a catastrophic expedition, paid for by spice. Francis Drake followed 17 years later. Between 1577 and 1580, Drake completed the second circumnavigation of the globe, again motivated primarily by the spice trade and the enormous profits available to anyone who could break the Portuguese and Spanish monopolies. He returned to England with a cargo of spices and plundered treasure so valuable that Queen Elizabeth I sailed out personally to meet his ship, the Golden Hind, as it docked at Deptford. She knighted him on the deck. The investors who backed Drake's voyage received a return of approximately 4,700%. That is not a misprint. 47 times their investment returned in a single voyage. The spice trade was not merely profitable, it was the most profitable enterprise in human history up to that point, and the returns it generated funded the naval power, the colonial infrastructure, and the financial institutions that made the modern world. And the pursuit of pepper did something else that is almost never mentioned. It invented modern navigation. The problem of finding a precise route to the Malabar coast and returning home required Europeans to solve one of the hardest mathematical problems of the age: how to determine your exact position in the middle of an ocean with no landmarks. Latitude could be measured from the stars. Longitude could not accurately, not reliably, not until the 18th century, when a clockmaker named John Harrison built a chronometer precise enough to solve the problem. The longitude problem was so important, so directly tied to the economic interests of the spice-trading nations, that the British government offered a prize of £20,000 for its solution in 1714. £20,000 in 1714 is the equivalent of several $1 million today. The British government was essentially paying a fortune to solve a navigation problem created by the need to find pepper. Harrison's solution eventually led to the precise timekeeping that underlies GPS, aviation, and every modern system of global positioning. Your phone knows where you are because of a problem that arose from trying to find a spice. Columbus was looking for pepper. This is the part of the story that gets left out of most history textbooks. Christopher Columbus was not primarily looking for a new continent. He was looking for a western route to the Spice Islands of Asia, specifically to the source of pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg. His patrons, Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, funded his voyage explicitly to find an alternative to the Portuguese route around Africa. When Columbus landed in the Caribbean in 1492, he found a plant the locals called ají, chili peppers, and reported it to Spain as a variety of black pepper, because he needed to believe he had found what he was looking for. He was wrong. Chili peppers are not related to black pepper, but his confusion tells you exactly what was on his mind. Columbus never found black pepper. He never reached Asia. But the continent he stumbled upon turned out to be worth considerably more than the spice route he was looking for. The search for pepper gave Europe the Americas. That is not a metaphor. It is what happened. Meanwhile, the competition between Portugal and Spain over the spice trade was so intense that it required papal intervention. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas literally divided the entire non-European world between the two powers along a line drawn through the Atlantic Ocean. Everything to the east belonged to Portugal. Everything to the west belonged to Spain. The rest of the world's population was not consulted. The line was drawn specifically to manage the competition for spice routes. It determined which empire colonized Brazil and which colonized most of Latin America. Its consequences lasted for 500 years and still shape the languages spoken across 2 continents today. All of this from a berry. The corporations Pepper built. The Portuguese monopoly on the spice trade didn't last. The Dutch broke it. In 1602, the Dutch government created the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. It was, by many measures, the first modern corporation in history. It issued publicly traded shares, had its own army, its own navy, its own legal authority to make treaties, wage war, and govern territory. At its peak, the VOC was the most valuable company in history, with a market capitalization, adjusted for inflation, that exceeds any modern corporation, including Apple or Amazon. All of it built on pepper, and nutmeg, and cloves. The VOC's methods were extraordinarily brutal. The island of Banda, the world's only source of nutmeg, was depopulated in 1621 when Jan Pieterszoon Koen led a military campaign that reduced its population from approximately 15,000 to approximately 1,000 in a matter of weeks. The survivors were enslaved. The island was resettled by Dutch colonists. The profits flowed back to Amsterdam, and Amsterdam spent them on beauty. In 1642, Rembrandt van Rijn completed The Night Watch, now considered one of the greatest paintings in Western art, hanging in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. It was commissioned by a group of Amsterdam militia officers, men whose wealth derived directly or indirectly from the VOC and the spice trade. The same year, Johannes Vermeer was beginning his career in nearby Delft, painting the luminous interiors that would make him immortal. Jan Steen, Frans Hals, Jacob van Rouwesdael, the entire extraordinary flowering of Dutch Golden Age painting happened in this precise moment, in this precise place, funded by this precise source. The light in those paintings, the extraordinary quality of Dutch Golden Age light, the soft, diffused glow that falls across Vermeer's women and Rembrandt's faces, is one of the most analyzed phenomena in art history. Where does that light come from? The answer, in part, is that Amsterdam in the 1640s was the wealthiest city in the world, and wealthy cities build large windows, and large windows let in light. The wealth came from the VOC. The VOC ran on spice. The spice was pepper. Every museum ticket sold to see Rembrandt is, in some small way, a transaction downstream from the genocide in the Banda Islands. The island that was worth more than Manhattan. In 1667, England and the Dutch Republic signed the Treaty of Breda, ending the Second Anglo-Dutch War. The treaty required both sides to exchange territories captured during the conflict. The Dutch had captured a small English settlement on the eastern coast of North America, a trading post on a long, narrow island at the mouth of a river. The English had captured Run, a tiny island in the Banda archipelago of what is now Indonesia, approximately 2 miles long and less than a mile wide, covered almost entirely in nutmeg trees. The Dutch wanted Run back, badly. It was one of the few sources of nutmeg outside their control, and the VOC's entire business model depended on maintaining the spice monopoly. The English negotiators looked at their options. They had this small forested island in North America on one side. On the other side, they had Run, a tiny dot in the middle of the Indonesian archipelago, producing the most valuable spice on earth. They chose Run. The Dutch got the small North American island. They renamed it New York. From the Dutch perspective in 1667, this was a reasonable trade. Nutmeg was among the most valuable commodities on earth. The North American settlement, which the Dutch had called New Amsterdam, was a modest trading post of a few thousand people at the edge of a wilderness. Run produced spice. New Amsterdam produced beaver pelts. The calculations seemed obvious. The Dutch were wrong in a way that is almost impossible to overstate. The island they traded away is now the most valuable piece of real estate on earth. The island they received in exchange produces nutmeg that sells for a few dollars a kilogram. The VOC, the corporation that made the trade, collapsed in bankruptcy in 1799. New York is worth approximately $3 trillion in real estate alone. A spice island for Manhattan, and the Dutch thought they'd won. Pepper today. Today, black pepper is the most widely traded spice in the world. Global production exceeds 500,000 metric tons annually. It is found in virtually every cuisine on earth, on virtually every dining table, in virtually every kitchen. And it costs almost nothing. The commodity that ransomed Rome, that launched the age of exploration, that funded the first multinational corporations and justified genocides, sells today for a few dollars a kilogram at wholesale. The price collapse began in the 19th century, when improvements in transportation and the end of monopoly trading made pepper widely available. By the 20th century, it was as ordinary as salt. Vietnam is now the world's largest producer of pepper, accounting for approximately 35% of global supply. Consider what that means for a moment. Vietnam, a country that the United States bombed with napalm and Agent Orange across vast stretches of its territory less than 60 years ago. A country that lost between 1 and 3 million people in a war that ended in 1975, is now the dominant supplier of the spice that Christopher Columbus was searching for when he accidentally discovered America. The farmers who grow pepper in Vietnam receive a tiny fraction of the retail price that their product commands in Western markets. When global pepper prices collapsed in the early 2000s, farmers across Vietnam saw their incomes fall by 70 to 80% in a matter of years. Many abandoned pepper cultivation entirely. The paradox is precise. The cheaper pepper becomes for the consumer, the more desperate the situation for the farmer who grew it. The value has not disappeared. It has been captured, as it always was, by the intermediaries between the farm and the table. The spice trade never really ended, it just changed its name. And yet pepper remains indispensable in ways that would have surprised even its most devoted ancient consumers. NASA has been sending black pepper to the International Space Station since the early days of human spaceflight. In microgravity, the human sense of taste changes. Fluids shift toward the head, congesting nasal passages and dulling flavor perception. Astronauts consistently report that food tastes bland in space. The solution that works better than almost anything else is black pepper. The spice that Alaric demanded as ransom for Rome flies today on missions to the edge of Earth's atmosphere. 2,000 years of human history have not found a substitute. Black pepper is still, by an enormous margin, the most widely traded spice on Earth. More black pepper is sold globally than cinnamon, cardamom, cumin, and all other spices combined. The commodity that once ransomed empires and launched circumnavigations has never lost its position at the top. It just lost its price. Finale. A world without pepper. No Roman obsession with the spice that drove trade deficits and shaped culinary culture across an empire. No Visigoth ransom demand. No Portuguese voyage around Africa. No Columbus sailing west to find a spice route and finding a continent instead. No Treaty of Tordesillas dividing the world between two empires. No VOC. No first modern corporation. No Amsterdam Stock Exchange. No Dutch Golden Age. No Night Watch. No Vermeer. No Rembrandt. No genocide of the Banda Islands people. No 3.5 centuries of Dutch colonial rule in Indonesia. A different shape to everything that followed. One berry, from one vine, on one coast. But here is what the history of pepper actually tells us about human nature. The violence that the spice trade generated was not an accident or an aberration. It was the logical endpoint of a simple equation. Enormous profit available, no moral constraint sufficient to prevent taking it by force. The people who burned the Miri and massacred the Bandanese were not monsters by the standards of their time. They were businessmen optimizing returns. The institutional structures, the VOC, the Estado da India, were designed specifically to extract maximum value with minimum accountability. The shareholders in Amsterdam who bought VOC stock and collected their dividends were not thinking about what happened in the Banda Islands. They were thinking about their returns. This equation, enormous profit, diffused accountability, distant victims, did not end with the spice trade. It is the operating logic of every extractive industry that followed. The details change, the structure doesn't. You put pepper on your food without thinking about any of this. That is exactly how it was designed to work.